All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to True Horror. My name is Charles Matheson. I bring you truth. I bring you justice. Today's sponsor is Billington Shipping. That's right. Look, do you want to trust the government to ship your packages? No, right? Do you want cardboard and styrofoam and whatever chemicals they're putting in that stuff? No, you want solid wood and earth. That's all you need, and that's all you want. And Billington Shipping can supply that for you. Thank you so much. All right, today I have a special treat for you guys. I'm really excited about this. All right, I'm on with Dr. John Seward. Say hi, Doctor.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me, I think.
You're welcome. I don't know if you'll be thanking me after the end of this conversation, but we'll see, right? That's what we're here to do. We're here to, yeah. So first off, Doctor, tell us a bit about yourself. Yeah. Who are you?
So I went to medical school in Carfax, did my residency in Exeter, and came back to the States, where I currently assist. I practice medicine at a mental health clinic a couple hours north of here.
Okay, so just to summarize, you left this country, got some degree at some place, and then came back here, and now you're practicing medicine at a what did you call it again? A psychiatric clinic? A what?
Oh, to clarify, the degree was a medical doctorate. About 10-ish years of school, plus or minus.
You sat in a building for 10 years. Okay.
Well, I wouldn't call it just that, but if you want, you're not entirely wrong. There were a lot of buildings and a lot of walking. Oh gosh. I ran through so many shoots during that time. But when I came back to the States, I started working at the. Sorry, do you mind if I say that one more time? I don't want your audience to have all that stuttering and stuff like that.
You do whatever you need.
Don't
worry, Doctor.
I appreciate that. When I came back, I started working at Demeter's Health Institute, which is a mental health clinic for people who are going through a lot of really difficult things in their life. I can't give too many details because of HIPAA. I can't give names, for example, but I can talk about
right.
And what they're going through.
Well, that's comforting to hear for me, at least. So just to be clear, right? You got a medical doctorate, then you came back to the States with your foreign medical doctorate, and now you practice mental health, which is not actually what you got your doctorate for.
Oh, it was a medical doctorate in psychiatry.
Okay.
Sure.
Right. Awesome.
I think that was kind of assumed because of context, but you're right. I could have clarified.
Okay. Well, so today, viewers, I am super excited because I have a treat planned for you. Hoo boy! Okay, so later in this video, I'm going to be showing you some important video clips about our good doctor here, Dr. John Seward, and one of his patients who has, according to some, delusions of being a vampire. Now, you know what we do.
Oh, yes, please, go ahead.
Okay. Now, you know what we do with delusions, with stories that people tell, right? There's always something behind it. So, Dr. John Seward, would you mind talking to us a little bit more about what constitutes a delusion?
So, a delusion is when the mind or the brain, depends on whether it's a psychological thing or a neurological thing, gets so damaged beyond repair that the brain starts creating sensations that aren't there, creating hallucinations, visual hallucinations, auditory hallucinations, tactile hallucinations that make people believe that the world is not as it really is. In Renfield's case, he has a very special kind of delusion that his body is playing into as well as his brain. We're actually naming it after him, Renfield syndrome, where he believes that he needs to drink blood to survive, and somehow his body is playing along with it, that he's apparently getting the proteins and the nutrients that he needs from animal blood without actually eating the meat. The jury's still out on how exactly that works. We're still researching Renfield syndrome and doing a lot of video footage of him to really understand where he's coming from and what he's experiencing. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. So it does. So to be clear, I just want to follow up on this question. Are you saying that you don't actually know what's going on with Renfield, with your patient?
We're saying that we are always learning new things, and we are fascinated to have something truly unprecedented. I don't think this has ever been experienced in the history of medicine. And so we're kind of on the verge of some cutting edge things here, and I'm really grateful to be able to share those things on this podcast. Thanks so much for bringing me on.
I would agree with you. I agree with you. I think we are on the verge of some really cutting edge things. I think the discovery of the medical industry that vampires do actually exist and that there are people out there who need apparently blood to survive. That seems like quite the discovery, if I do say so myself.
Well, hold on. We haven't quite ruled out the idea that he's a vampire, but for now, we are sticking with a psychological and neurological trauma, maybe even a physical trauma that leads him to believe that he's a vampire. And we're really learning a lot from that about how trauma can affect not just the mind, not just the brain, but the body as well. And I don't want this to get misrepresented as mythical folklore and legend. There's a long and storied history of vampires, and I don't want to be disrespectful to the cultures that came up with those and that experienced those and found meaning through those because of my patient's trauma. Nor do I want to be disrespectful to my patient's trauma.
Right. Mm-hmm. So when you talk about a delusion, you mentioned that the brain is so damaged. So how do you go about finding out if someone's brain is so damaged that it creates this delusion? How do you confirm that?
Great question. We have things like MRIs and brain scans that allow us to see literally what's happening in their brain and see that parts of their brain are literally damaged, maybe from a car accident or maybe from a fist fight with some unsavory materials. And barring that, assuming that doesn't work, because apparently in Renfield's case, his MRIs have come back clean, his CAT scans have come back clean, his brain is neurologically functioning as normal, the physical, biological parts of his brain are functioning normally, but it's the psychological parts of his brain. He's experienced some immensely terrible things recently, things that would tear a person's reality apart and make them feel like they can't cope anymore in the real world and need some sort of fantasy to help them to cope. It's part of the reason that we have fiction and fantasy, and part of the reason that we have stories that we tell ourselves. The delusion is just when the story becomes real to us, and when we decide that reality no longer is useful to us.
Mm-hmm. So I have a couple questions here now.
Of course, that's what I came here for.
So first off, I understand that in your field there are certain expectations of privacy and secrecy, and I'm not here obviously to offend you, so at least more than necessary. But would you care to elaborate on some of these traumas that might have caused someone to, in your words, believe they're a vampire, or in this case have all of the physical signs of being a vampire without, of course, obviously actually being a vampire, because those, according to you, may or may not be real.
So we can only speculate on what exactly happened to Renfield. I've never actually met this man before I started treating him. But these sorts of traumas may come from things like childhood abandonment or childhood abuse, or maybe partner abuse, or maybe just abuse from the world in general. Maybe life just was so bad to him so much in a row. There were so many tragedies that he just snapped. I would take a guess that some form of his tragedies and his traumas may have been related to bats or to blood somehow. Maybe I don't want to be quoting Batman here or anything, but maybe he lost his wife and his mother at the same time to a swarm of vampire bats. Maybe he was visiting a graveyard and lost somebody that was close to him through an extreme loss of blood, or maybe somebody that he knew had some sort of garlic allergy, and their death was something that he couldn't cope with. Maybe his father abused him as a child with images of vampires or vampire bats. I can never really know for sure, because it's hard to trust anything that he says. He says that what happened was he met someone who he calls master. He refuses to tell me who this master is, and that his life changed ever since. So it's possible that he was indoctrinated into a cult or some sort of brainwashing around the theme of vampires. That's a possibility. We haven't ruled that out yet. But considering we haven't met many people who did know Renfield, it's hard to figure out what actually happened to him.
Yeah, it's really interesting. In every conversation, and I haven't had many, to be fair, I want to be honest on this podcast. I believe in honesty. But it's so interesting to me how we expect so much of our learned people, right? You go, you sacrifice much, you leave the country, you wear through so many foreign shoes, and you come back for what? To guess, to not know, to make assumptions based on something, right? You think that there are many different things that could have happened to this Renfield, but all you know really is the evidence that's in front of you, right? And I do want to say that sometimes the simplest answer is the right answer. In fact, often the simplest answer is the right answer. I can't remember who exactly I'm quoting there. I'm sure I'm quoting somebody. Thank you. Your education clearly speaks for itself. But I just find it so interesting that we come here to talk about this person, and you believe that he's experienced some trauma. But the only evidence of that trauma that you have is the psychosis that you believe stems from the trauma.
Well,
now I don't know about you, but that's shady. That I don't know. That just, for me personally, it's a little weird.
Well, we have a saying in the medical industry that when you see hoof prints, think of a horse, not a zebra. And you've probably heard, when there's smoke, there's fire. When there's psychosis, there's trauma. And when we see that sort of psychosis, we assume horses, not zebras. We assume psychosis. We assume trauma, not the walking undead among us.
For sure, and that's all well and good until someone just happens to own a zebra.
That's true. There are actual zebras, which is why, we rule out the horses first. And then, if there is a zebra, we look at each other and say, wow, this is the greatest scientific breakthrough of the past few decades.
I think discovering one of the biggest predators known to man and, having it just live in a house is definitely a great discovery. For who, I'm not entirely sure, but it definitely is great for someone. So I had another question. You want to talk a little bit more about what exactly is an MRI? Right? Because I had an MRI once when I was a kid. I was very small, but all I remember is I went into a tube, I came out of the tube, and then they said, here are some pictures of the time you were in the tube, right? Now, again, seems kind of weird, right? Like, I can make a tube out of like cardboard and sheet metal, and I can put someone in the tube and I can take them out of the tube. I can tell them like, hey, don't move, you're in a tube. I can take them out of the tube and then show them pictures that I found on the internet and be like, here are some pictures of your brain. And you can't confirm that because you're not going to cut your head open and look at your brain and compare the two. So what, can you clarify that for me?
Okay. So you know how your brain has electrical signals that go throughout your brain, the synapses?
Sure. Yeah, we'll go with that.
So an MRI, magnetic resonance imaging, is where you get in a giant magnet and it detects where exactly those electrical signals are going, from where to where, and you have some spots with more electrical signals and some spots with less electrical signals. It's a little bit like a Geiger counter for the brain, or like a stud finder for the brain, or like a metal detector for the brain, where you just go over it a couple times and you get to see all of, I'm so sorry about that, and you get to see all of the activity that's happening in the brain all at once. It's kind of a medical miracle.
And yet we still know so little about the brain. I mean, obviously you're discovering things now, aren't you? Right?
That's what makes it such a wonderful study, is getting to understand our brains and ourselves better.
Yeah. Well, wonderful is definitely a word for it. I don't know. I had a sister who had an MRI, and yeah, that wasn't great. But anyway, so Renfield. He has these delusions, and we're going to see some video footage of what exactly these delusions will look like and seem to be. One of the things that I noticed is that he has these interesting kind of leaps from like utter like insanity to like very kind of lucid moments, I guess is one way of looking at them. So how do you explain that in terms of Renfield's delusion? These moments of clear lucidity where his brain is functioning fine, and then one moment it's fine, and the next moment it's not fine. Like how do you resolve that?
The moments of lucidity are exactly what we're aiming for, exactly what we're hoping to bring him into, and hoping that someday he can be experiencing full lucidity all the time, that he can be fully recovered and never have to experience these delusions anymore. The way that I might explain it is a little bit like pausing a movie, where his delusions are the fantasy that he's been playing out in his head and the world that he's been living out for himself, and then he pauses for just a moment to come back to the real world. It's very infrequent, though. We've had maybe 2 lucid moments in the past 3 weeks, but that's more than it was. It used to be 0 lucid moments in the past 3 weeks. So we're very grateful that occasionally he's willing to pause the tape and come back to reality. Unfortunately, that does force him to live in a world where he has experienced whatever trauma he's experienced, and have to face life on its own terms. He has to face life in a world without vampires, in a world without this great master, he calls it, that gives his life meaning, and has to look at a world where sometimes people just die, sometimes people just get sick, sometimes people just get hurt, and not all of it has a rhyme or reason to it. But when that gets too much for him, he has to turn back on the tape and go back to his delusion because his brain can't handle it.
So you want a lucid vampire. That's your goal here. Right? You've got someone who is physically convinced that they drink blood, right? That they need to drink blood, and their body is the thing responding to that, not their brain, right? As you established. And you want to make that person who has this need, you want to make them sane. Functioning.
We're aiming for a lucid human.
Mm-hmm.
And our goal is that while bringing him out of the trauma, helping his brain to realize that he can survive on other things, that he can eat, normal human food. That part has
clearly he doesn't need to.
He doesn't need to, but he can. And we're trying to help him learn that there's more to life than just blood, so that he can live a more fulfilling life in society.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So another question: why all this secrecy in the medical field? Right now, I'm not entirely sure how this video clip came to me. I just consider myself very lucky to have received it. There was an anonymous, probably a fan. Again, thank you, everyone listening. I just want to take a moment and say that I appreciate that you are here, that you are engaging with me, that you understand the gravity of the things that I'm talking about. This is important, right? And I appreciate that I have people out there in the field who are finding this information so that they can bring it to me, because I don't know how accessible the clip that I have received is for the common person. So first off, would you mind expanding on that? Did you know that these videos were widely available?
The Demeter Institute has been very careful about which parts of our research would be infringing on our patients' privacy rights and, frankly, rights of dignity as human beings, and which parts would be acceptable for a very select audience for the purposes of research and understanding, so that we can treat more people better in the future. There are a lot of experiences that we have with Renfield that are documented for our purposes and for further research purposes, that for his privacy and for the sake of everybody involved, we can't release to the general public. Does that answer your question? I feel like I wasn't quite clear on what the question was.
Okay, so I think that kind of answers it. So the reason that you hide all of this information from the public, something that most people in a scientific field do, mind you, is for the privacy of your patients, more or less. That is your statement, right?
Yes.
Okay, so with something like Renfield, right? Maybe he's a vampire, maybe he's not. Maybe. Probably he is, but that's my opinion, whatever. My question is how are we supposed to defend ourselves if we don't have all of the information, right? If you release things piecemeal, right? If you keep all of these secrets from the populace, sure, some people have a right to privacy. Fine. But when it's a matter of not national, but global security, okay, right? When we have something that you can't explain, that you don't know about, maybe you'll be able to explain it at some point, but by the time you figure out your nice and clean explanation for how this all should work, we're already in World War III or something, right? That's the problem. And so how do we protect ourselves in the meantime if we don't have all the information?
You protect yourselves by taking care of yourselves the way that you always do. By exercising and getting good sleep and drinking enough water and having a good healthy diet, and taking care of your mental health by spending time with the people you love and doing the things that bring you joy. And if you choose to believe that that my patient is a different species of the walking undead, then I guess you could maybe put some garlic in your pocket or wear a cross or something like that. We have plenty of stories of how to protect ourselves from vampires, but if there were a state of emergency around this particular vampire, we would be fast tracking this so hard that you would know for an absolute fact that this is a vampire. Instead, this is something where he's enclosed. He has no of leaving or of biting any. I guess if that's what you're worried about, he has no chance of causing harm to anybody. I mean, you saw in the couple clips there, this is a man who has no intention of harming somebody. This is a man who is just a simple man who wants to experience his own personal fantasy without worrying about everybody else. He's not trying to cause harm. We're just making sure to research him and understand him so that if somebody else experiences the same delusions, we can understand how to treat and help them better.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what recommendations would you give to other people, to my listeners, should they encounter someone like Renfield, just out in the world, right? Clearly there's one. Who knows how many other people out there are right now who are convinced for some unfathomable reason that no one can understand because of reasons. How would you recommend we treat someone? Should there be more people with this specific, to use your word, delusion?
Well, we treat people with mental illnesses with respect and understanding, and if they actually do pose some sort of threat to society or become some sort of danger to society or pose some sort of threat of harm to themselves, not just others, call up the Demeter Institute. We'll be happy to help them to stay on their feet and to protect themselves from themselves, to protect them from themselves, and to protect other people from them should they pose a harm to themselves or others. But if it's just a guy who believes that he met some vampire in the woods and he's not posing any sort of harm or threat to others or to himself, of course, treat him with respect and civility just like you would a normal human being.
And how do you know when someone poses a threat? How do you know that tomorrow when you go into the office and talk to Renfield that he's not just gonna freak out at you? Because, oh boy, people are unpredictable.
People are absolutely unpredictable, especially in psychiatric work. That's a really good question. I suppose with Renfield specifically, part of it is an attempt to cause harm, but part of it is statements with the intent to cause harm. Sometimes that can be just threatening statements and threatening words to other people that are taken seriously enough, not just things that could clearly be passed off as jokes, but sometimes it's things like the freaking out that you're talking about.
Mm-hmm. I have another question. Is the Demeter Institute a private or a public organization?
we're partly funded by government grants and partly funded by private grants from various generous donors and charitable donations, and from some local businesses.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure they would be very invested in making sure that that your place of business is successful. Yeah, government grants. We all know where those go. But fantastic. Thank you so much for having this conversation with me, Doctor. I genuinely appreciate it. I'm sorry, I didn't hear you for a second there.
Oh, of course, I'm very grateful to at least get to process outwardly with somebody who isn't just in my little echo chamber. It's easy for me to spend far too much time just talking with other academics and researchers at the Institute, rather than getting out in the public and at least getting to air my thoughts.
Well, I'm glad you can at least recognize the flaws inherent to only spending time with your compatriots. I hope that both you as well as my listeners will take into account some important things that we've learned today. We've learned, one, that you can just leave the country and get a degree and come back like nothing happened and just your degree's fine. That's okay. We've learned that if you don't know about someone's past or medical history, that you can just assume that their medical history is what you think it is because you see the results of it, even though you can't actually comprehend all of the results of someone's medical history. But whatever. We've learned that.
Clarify. I'm so sorry for interrupting. I just wanted to clarify that, like, foreign universities, studies abroad, foreign institutes of higher learning, they're not any lesser than American institutes. That's
why they give them out for free, because they're not lesser, so they're free.
I have many friends who went to wonderful American institutes, but also I worked just as hard to go to a school in Exeter or Carfax as you might have to go to your college experience. And throughout that experience, I had wonderful educators who made sure that I understood the material and that I was going to be able to be a successful psychiatrist someday. I'm sorry, the second thing you were talking about was just assuming somebody's medical history. We do as little assumptions as possible, but sometimes we, make reasonable inferences based on evidence that we assume. For example, that I can see a podcast microphone sitting in front of you. I feel like I can reasonably assume that that microphone is plugged in, even though I can't see it. That seems like a reasonable inference based on evidence. Does that make more sense than just assuming some medical history?
I mean, you could assume that. You certainly could. I don't know. A lot of bad things happen to a lot of good people because they make assumptions, and that's just something that really gets my goat. I am sorry if I've offended you, but that's just how it is, right? The world is full of unknowns, and so if you go outside with the belief that nothing bad will happen to you because nothing bad has happened to you so far, boy, are you going to be disappointed. And that's really that's why I'm doing this work, right? That's why my wonderful and fantastic listeners tune in every week. That's why we have these conversations, is so that we don't have to make assumptions, right? And that's the thing, right? Is that if we're out here, right? If I see someone and they claim that they need to drink blood to survive, and I observe them, and they claim that they are a vampire, right? It seems to me that their claims are just as much evidence as my claims that they are delusional, that they have had some past trauma, right? We're both making claims here, and neither claim is verifiable. Neither claim has any real evidence behind it at face value.
Perhaps it may have been better to hold off on this particular interview until after we had more evidence and more concrete results, until we were able to say, okay, this is what Renfield syndrome is, this is what he experienced, this caused it. Would have been better for you and your listeners?
I'm sure you would have really appreciated that, really been able to get your story together. But for the meantime, I'm just going to cut to a brief clip that we have. I've been kind of talking about it this whole time, and I'm very, very excited to show it to you listeners, or if you're listening to the podcast, obviously, to hear some of this audio. So yeah, we're going to cut to this clip of Renfield, and I don't know, you tell me. You tell me if this man is delusional, or if one of us knows what we're talking about, and there are things out there that are real that we aren't willing to admit are real. Thank you.
What are you doing?
I'm just making sure that other people can understand your condition.
Condition? I get it, Master. I get it, Master. Yeah. Yes. I'm not the crazy one here. If anything, it's everyone else right now. The Master protects me, the Master keeps me safe, the Master protects me, the Master keeps me safe, the Master protects me, the Master keeps me safe. Just know that he may seem human, but when you look a little bit more into it, into the eyes, into the teeth, into the nose, into the ears, even into the head, something will always be off. And many people just can't see. They just have trouble seeing. You just have to open it. Just open it. There's a dog right there with a human face.
Renfield.
Told you, Master provides.
Renfield, you can't keep eating spiders like that.
Then get me a cat. Then get me a cat! Meow. Meow. Did you know that the human body, on average, has 1.3 gallons of blood?
Renfield, what's wrong? Renfield, what's wrong?
Who's in charge of what? What goes where? Who is where? I'm not crazy.
All right, guys, you heard what that guy said. You heard everything that we talked about, all right? Did you see how he didn't even flinch as he was talking about literally making ourselves better meat for the vampires that could be out there, right? We know there's one. We know he has a master. There could be more. You don't know. And as long as you don't know, you need to keep yourself safe. I can't even begin to comprehend the ignorance of these people who they stay in their psychiatric wards or whatever, right? They think they know everything, and clearly they don't know anything at all because they don't even know what's going on with this guy, and so they just make up a name because they can't use the word that's already there, and the word is vampire. Thank you very much. Have a good night.